this is where my rubbish goes in Durban. It's a big port, biggest port in Africa on the Indian Ocean. And in 1980, the apartheid regime decided just to dump its huge amounts of waste from the city in a black neighborhood. So they actually, this was a black, we call Indian, so-called colored, mixed race, and African, generically black, but the middle-income Indian community of Fair Estate, and working class and low-income Indian people here, and colored, mixed-race people, low-income, lower middle class there. And then up here, going up to the top of the screen, you'll have shacks inhabited by several thousand Africans. It gets complicated because divide and conquer politics being what they are in South Africa today, some of the shack dwellers do have jobs. 40 of them have jobs actually on the site, and so they're a very well-regarded organization, Abashlali Basanjandola, the movement of the shack dwellers, has actually come out in support of what I'm going to describe here, which is the World Bank's prototype carbon fund proposal to make this the largest clean development mechanism, the largest carbon trading project in Africa so far. And I'll tell you about one woman, and this was the home here of Sajida Khan until last July. She lived right here, and of course the wind will blow, and this is a vast big dump of toxins. There was a medical incinerator, medical waste incinerator there as well. So she got cancer on 2 occasions and passed away last July. The struggle that she embarked upon, though, with thousands of her colleagues, failing to cross the race and class boundaries, though, failing to find ways to reach out into the shack dwellers and find areas of common interest in particularly the common respiratory crises, the asthma, the tuberculosis racing through many of these shack settlements that take you from HIV positive to full-blown AIDS, and the particularly devastating role this has for women as caregivers, and as you'll see, as those who have to deal with inadequate electricity. These all should have come together, they didn't, and unfortunately Sajida Khan is no longer with us. This was the view from her house, and the idea was that the rotting rubbish, the methane, created very, very serious greenhouse gas, would then be converted to electricity and burned through incineration, through flaring on site, with all of the implications for further respiratory problems. And that would be in turn given to the Durban municipal grid. And we do have blackouts across South Africa and in Durban, so having some more electricity would be good. The problem is, as I showed you, the electricity is so cheap from coal burning that this was quite expensive, and it requires a subsidy of about $15 million. And that subsidy would then come from the World Bank marketing the project, methane to electricity, as an emissions reduction credit that it then sells to big northern companies so they can keep polluting. It sounds like a win-win, but the effect of this is for Sajida Khan to gain the emissions reductions credit, to keep this site open, they have to keep the site open as long as they can. So in 1980, the site was open. 1994, the African National Congress comes to power with promises of closure. They never did it. And in 2002, the World Bank comes in through the World Summit on Sustainable Development and says, okay, great project here, and spends 3 years working really hard, and the municipality's got a huge, big proposal together. Sajida Khan has been fighting this dump. She lived there the whole time in that house I just showed you. Got cancer once, just got cancer again in 2006, and died in July 2007. She died, however, having left us this amazing legacy of having fought the World Bank, and as the Washington Post profiled her on the front page in February 2005 when they did the sort of story on Kyoto Protocol coming into effect when Russia endorsed it. Sajida was the sort of story, well, maybe it isn't such a good idea after all. And all of the campaigning that subsequently happened, but particularly her work just as a sort of lay scientist in saying, this isn't right to keep messing the community with this dump. It should be closed. Get the methane out to be sure, but don't keep the dump open by making it an emissions reduction project to keep northern companies satisfied that they'll continue their emissions. Now, She did then file about 90 pages of environmental impact assessment critique, and it intimidated the bank, and they walked away from it. They did a couple of other much smaller little deals, methane to electricity and other dumps around. But basically, she kind of won a battle to get the World Bank out. It's not yet a carbon or emissions trading project. But she died, she lost the war, cancer took her away, so we do remember her with great fondness, and the tragedy of not having a full coalition to support her, including the shack dwellers who themselves are so adversely affected by the same kinds of diseases, was a great tragedy. So who's winning from all this? It's the big corporations, to be sure, Shell and BHP Billiton just coming in now to buy Rio Tinto, which just bought Alcan from EDF and some others, you know, Mitsubishi, Cargill, Nippon Steel, Chevron. And the third world corporations, the equivalents of big energy sector companies and timber companies like Plantar, Petrobras, the Brazilian oil company, Sasol, South Africa's oil to coal to oil conversion company, which Graham Marion was able to find some tremendous exposés of their gaming the system. Mondi, the paper company. So you can see it's a game between big corporations and the agents like the World Bank's Prototype Carbon Fund that put them all together. But does it work? A year ago, Peter Atherton somehow left a PowerPoint slide around, and it's gotten around and about. He's an investor at Citibank, and he kind of left this around, and this is what he said. The European emissions trading system has done nothing to curb emissions. It's a highly regressive tax, falling mostly on poor people. Have policy goals been achieved? Prices are up, emissions are up, profits are up, so not really. All generation-based utilities are the winners. Coal and nuclear-based generators are the biggest winners. Hedge funds and energy traders are even bigger winners. Losers, consumers. And you know, this is the kind of guy who's going to be putting billions of his institution's money into the game. You've got to figure out, is this actually going to do anything? If you look ahead as a Citibank strategist, would this be a good investment? And he's saying, no, that's actually, there's too much scamming. And the Wall Street Journal, obviously a right-wing, ideologically, probably pro-denialist sort of journal editorials, but their conclusion, I think, is valid last March. Emissions trading would make money for some very large corporations. Don't believe for a minute that this charade would do much about global warming. It's old-fashioned rent-seeking, making money by gaming the regulatory process. Some more. Newsweek last year. It isn't working. Talking about the clean development mechanisms. It's a grossly inefficient way of cutting emissions in the developing world. It's a shell game. $3 billion going to some of the worst carbon polluters in the developing world. The Financial Times did a whole series of French-page exposés last April declaring the carbon smokescreen. As The Guardian put it in June, huge profits, little carbon saved, abuse and incompetence in the fight against global warming. It's the inconvenient truth about the carbon offset industry. So just to recall that Gore was endorsing this, it works, it's a US innovation from the sulfur dioxide trading system in Southern California, but here's the real evidence that it's not. So we move to some of the ways forward that would be much more genuine, not reformist reforms, i.e. the kind of reforms that you can figure might do something at the margin, if you're really lucky, but basically amplify the internal dynamics and undergird the logic of the capitalist system. That's a reformist reform. I think non-reformist reforms, to use Andre Gortz's distinction, a non-reformist reform has to absolutely undercut the logic of the system, but particularly also to empower those opponents of the system. Reformist reforms will take away your momentum and co-opt you and divide and conquer you and leave you without a movement. Non-reformist reforms, or transitional reforms, our Trotskyist friends would say, maybe, would then open the door to much more revolutionary